Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this breakout session of the second MAP Next Gen CEO web conference for 2021. I'm Paolo AZURIN, adjunct professor at the Asian Institute of Management and head of investment banking at CLSA, your moderator for this session. So this breakout session on the startup Bayanihan ecosystem is part of the third session of the good enterprise. No? So track two. Please settle down comfortably. We'll now begin our program. So I am pleased to introduce to the group, no, for this breakout session, Ms. KATRINA RAUSA Chan, Executive Director of IdeaSpace and Kubo Innovations Hub. So may please turn it over to KATRINA for your presentation.
Yeah, thanks so much, Paolo. I'll start this off with a quick presentation, and then very happy to discuss with you and their audience about any questions you might have or any questions you might have about the kind of tech startup scene which I'm part of. So let me do that now. Hold on. And I hope my presentation loads properly. We did do a tech run, but let's see. Let me know when you can see my screen. But yeah, today I'm Kat and I'm going to be talking about startups and I suppose bayanihan with startups since we're talking about like the good enterprise or the good business, right? So just a little bit about me. I'm not super next gen. I am a millennial, but not a Gen Z. And I guess I'm speaking to you here today because I started this organization called Kubo Innovation Hub. I was an intern and then an associate director at IdeaSpace, now executive director. And I suppose we collaborated with the government to build this public-private partnership that now works with over 500 tech startups and, hundreds of ecosystem partners to really develop and foster the startup ecosystem, the startup community in the Philippines. So I have about 20 minutes to speak. And I guess, of course, I do want to spend a few minutes to introduce you to our organization and also give you a quick overview on what's going on in the Philippine startup ecosystem. But I suppose the rest of this talk will really be about, sort of some of my lessons learned or tips and engaging with all of you on, like how we can build good businesses, I suppose. So so let's get to it. About us, I don't know if, at least for me, I know I've spent much more time watching K-dramas or just streaming in general, but there was a decently good one, like definitely a much more tall and attractive cast than our probably typical startup founder. But, and if any of you see this on Netflix, if you have, essentially we're kind of like the sandbox in this situation, right? So again, I'm the executive director of this organization called IdeaSpace, like way before K-dramas were a thing. It just actually started about 10 years ago. We're a nonprofit that's really all about technology development, innovation, as well as supporting entrepreneurship in the Philippines. And if you want proof of that, we have really old photos. It's like every year we develop and support and fund multiple startups. Our current portfolio, as I mentioned, we've invested in at least 100, 130 or so. We have a batch ongoing even. And if you're, again, an early stage startup looking for funding, please check this out, but I won't say more for now. And 5 years ago, I also co-founded this organization called Kubo. So it doesn't stand for QuickBooks, by the way. It's really about the Bahay Kubo. And it was inspired by this idea of bayanihan and teamwork to like from humble beginnings, or like if they talk about the garage all the time, like in the Philippines, if you have a detached garage with a car, you're probably pretty fancy. So we wanted to give everyone a chance to be, take part in the startup ecosystem and have a good shot at launching their own businesses. So that's what we ended up doing. And it's a public-private partnership together with the DOST and DTI from the government, as well as JP Morgan, and of course, IdeaSpace. And we do work with the startups across stages. So from very early idea stage, anywhere in the country to, I don't know, Kumu was one of our incubatees and they just raised their Series C, right? So across the stages in your journey and also different sectors, everything from, I don't know, rocket science, seaweeds to, again, media and e-commerce. Really here to work with you. And our whole vision is Filipino startups changing the world. And yeah, I guess we kind of have three core actions. The first is to grow the startup community. Like, it's still relatively small in the Philippines, and we want to engage more of you. That's why I'm speaking here, to kind of be part of this. Of course, the biggest part of it is to develop our startup founders, and last but not least, to collaborate and work with the rest of the ecosystem, because it takes a village, I suppose, to raise a startup, and that's what we're here to do. So, we're one of the Philippines' leading startup support organizations. Apart from the 100-ish startups we funded, we've supported over 500 startups, and that number is growing. That's part of our community. Again, it's free to join. So if you're a startup and you're not a Kubo member, please join. And we conduct over 100 programs in any given year. And yeah, we've invested hundreds of millions in startups. And we collaborate with a lot of organizations. So I know the map has a lot of members. So, again, if you're kind of interested and you're not sure where to start when it comes to startups, and you're looking into this, please shoot me an email, talk to me after this, right? Ask me a question, the Q&A. I'm more than happy. Again, bayanihan and working together is a big part of what we do. And yeah, I won't go into like all of the programs and services. I do want to draw attention to a few. Like happening right now, like as we speak, we have like our road shows and our kind of compete and bootcamp events. So we've, like these are our early stage programs, a lot of them like really reaching some of the more underserved communities in the Philippines. And for boot camps, these are really like if you just have an idea and you want to get your first 100 customers or validate whether the idea makes sense. That's what that's for, and we're doing for women. We also have Philippine Startup Week happening next week. So this is definitely a big one. You shouldn't miss it. So Philippine Startup Week, link in the description kind of thing. And of course, for our management friends, we do have a few programs for working with corporates. You're not the first, right? Like to kind of not be sure about how to interact with startups, and that's exactly what we do. So again, just get in touch if there's any of this sounds interesting to you, and I'm happy to kind of Sherpa you through the whole process. But yeah, so I guess for the rest of my talk, I have like about 15 minutes left. I do want to talk about the Philippine startup ecosystem. We talk about the most valuable companies in the world. If you're a career entrant, and probably talent's the biggest thing that most managers are looking into, right? When I was graduating college, there was one tech company in this top 10 kind of highest market cap list. That was Microsoft. And today, like, I think all of them are. I believe as of the end of 2021, like Saudi Aramco got into this list somehow. But not that being said, right? Like, it's definitely been a huge shift in terms of what's considered creating value these days, and like what's big and hot. And it's not something to be ignored. In fact, not just in the world, right? But even in the region, a lot of the headlines are being dominated by these so-called startups and tech companies. And many of them started within this generation, this lifetime, right? And they're addressing today's kind of problems. And however we might feel about, how tech is, whether it's good or bad in the world or whatever, right? Like they are creating jobs. This is sort of where a lot of the economy is headed towards, and it's not something we can and and I guess it challenges a lot of the notions that maybe we grew up with about what success is, or even the acceptance of failure or trying something out. And And apart from just starting your own business, I think this whole mindset of being able to kind of, you know, experiment and especially work with tech, work with something that scales. Like there's a lot to learn from that we can apply as, as managers, as entrepreneurs in, in whatever it is we're kind of working on, right? So, um, yeah, and I suppose in the Philippines, just to give you a sense of scale, we have just about 1,000 active tech startups, which isn't a lot, honestly, but it's also like a good base to start with. Definitely a growing number of venture capitalists, co-working spaces, angel investors, and also, I mean, I have to add, like, a lot more schools are also kind of looking at, entrepreneurial skills as a big thing that they're growing. And a few laws and stuff like that have been passed also, and from the government and policy perspective to kind of encourage more entrepreneurship. We did work with MAP, among others, and PwC on like our Philippine startup survey. I cannot tell you like what to invest in. If I knew, like, I'd probably be a multi-billionaire, but I can tell you what's popular, right? So, serving enterprise is still, and of course, working with AI, like our whole kind of history with the service sector and BPOs is still a strength in our software and tech companies in Philippines. The iron triangle that they like to call it, right? Being that being e-commerce, logistics, and fintech, also like a very big play. Um, Marketing, media, and advertising. I kind of alluded to Kumu in their Series C earlier, but we have a few others like Podcast Network Asia, like a lot of like kind of chat companies, right? So a lot of things in the creative industry also picking up steam. And of course, like the things that are considered sort of essential, right? Especially in a growing economy. So education, medical, travel, right? All the essential services that you can think of. I think that's become more prevalent, especially during COVID. And in terms of rankings and things like that, like we do a lot of reports. I won't bore you here, but it's generally looking up, right? And there are lots of good reasons for that. Like the demographic dividends, definitely one. But a few other things. I think our talent's definitely one big thing. And in the same vein, right? Let me. There are also challenges. So I guess in terms of funding, the Philippines does still lag behind. I think we did surpass Myanmar this year. This was a 2020 slide, but anyway, so there's still definitely a lot of opportunity. The valuations are still relatively low in Philippines, right? But raising capital is definitely a big thing. Regulatory requirements, and talent again is a big one. But we did survey a lot of MAP CEOs. I think half of you this year said you wanted to kind of invest in or get into startups. So if you're curious, please let me know. That being said, I almost feel guilty about this sometimes. Like COVID sucks, right? Like I hate that I'm doing this conference sort of in my bedroom. But that being said, while of course our startups did also feel the pain, just like everyone else, this has also presented a number of opportunities. And I think that's the great thing about the startup mindset is this idea that you can pivot quickly, or you can kind of do damage control quickly, or change your idea. Like obviously, like companies like Grab are probably the obvious sort of success stories, but many categories have actually seen their growth become accelerated by this pandemic. And this is disproportionately true for companies that have embraced sort of tech, right? And it's not like a niche thing anymore. Like it's not like, oh, it's like this your weird cousin that's into crypto, right? Like your tita, your lolo, right? Like they're all kind of using some kind of app, maybe. Again, smartphone internet penetration, like all these stats you've heard, right? Like we're really seeing the impact of that coming into like sort of day-to-day life. And that's exactly true also for startups. I know Daria was speaking in this track. He's the founder of Future Fresh, right? But we have so many other startups. I think apart from, like, you're not a VC, that's fine, right? But like the number one thing that most startups and beg for are actually customers. So, if you have a problem, see if there is like maybe a local company that's addressing that solution, right? maybe there's a way you can be a customer or work with them somehow. And we have quite a number that are very, very promising, especially and growing now that in spite of the challenging circumstances we're seeing. And yeah, I guess when it comes to good business, right? Like I am a big believer that supporting startups is key to, our resilience as a country, and not just the resilience, but how we recover and even do better after this, how we become competitive. Um, they're saying the digital economy can account for like about a quarter of our GDP as soon as next year, right? Or 2 years from now, rather. And we're creating jobs, we're creating new opportunities for people, right? And we're solving problems. And that's something that maybe we're in a better position to do, right? Like there are more places in the world that look like, I don't know, Pasig, right, than Palo Alto, like or something like that. So um, that's definitely a challenge for entrepreneurs, but even for us, right, and something to think about. So, the dream is always to build a unicorn, right? Like that's a mythical kind of multi-billion-dollar valuation company. But, as someone from Cuba, I wouldn't mind having hundreds of calabaos also, like organizations that work hard, that create value, that solve problems for people like us. So, yeah, like I think that's what we're setting out to do. So, I guess to wrap up my last kind of 5 minutes, I did want to do a few kind of lessons, takeaways. I think I have three here. Um, the first is to listen. I think that's one thing that startups are really good at. And I think this makes sense whether you're a founder, starting your own business, or just, a manager in general, right? Like talk to and listen to your customers. And, like the common saying, I think it was like the Waze guy that said this first, something like fall in love with the problem and not the solution, right? So there are lots of ideas and they might be good ones, but there are always multiple ways to skin the cat or solve the problem, right? And like if once you kind of get stuck on the problem, or rather the solution, as opposed to the problem that we're trying to solve in the first place, like that can really lead you astray. So paying attention to what is the value proposition and what you're trying to solve, I think is the most important part of like building a business that not just lasts but thrives. And I think especially in these challenging times, like exercising empathy, like your team is the number one thing right now. It's been a shitty year for everyone, right? But yeah, like paying attention to not just your culture, but like really like how your team is doing, like that's the way that you can continue to deliver value. And I think that's something that we kind of tend to forget sometimes. um and I guess we try to apply this in our own organization, like aside from funding, which is like what everyone always talks about. We're always talking to our startups and paying attention to what they are looking for, right? As I said earlier, like the big majority really just wants customers, so please like use a startup service. But anyway, like, and yeah, like again, like the way that it might not be what you envisaged, right? But you know the how can change, right? But the why you're doing it shouldn't. So, in our case, like we really set out to build a community that would support sort of founders. And while it makes me really sad that we no longer can use our co-working space, or, Philippine Startup Week this year is just going to be a bunch of screens, right? Like, I do feel like we still deliver that sort of core value. And I think that's something that you need to think about, like, as managers and leaders. Yeah, and I guess same goes with our laws and things like that also, and how we built them, but I won't get into that now. The second thing is like, yeah, my second tip, I guess, like, yeah, for startups, honestly, the execution is such a bigger deal versus the idea. Like just do it, like don't perfect the idea or like kind of keep working on it without like actually getting feedback from people or trying it out. It's better to put out like kind of maybe a less than perfect product, but learn from that. Like we call it the minimum viable product, right? The MVP. Um, and just iterate and test and repeat what you're doing, right? Because I guess the idea, as I said, the idea can always change. I think this is something that a lot of maybe you'll think about. And the idea is just one part of the whole kind of startup equation, right? Like, so the team, as I said, is like super important, the diversity of that team, and like, of course, like the business model and funding, the traction, right? And even just luck and timing, right? Like, so I think out of these five, when they did survey, it was something that the timing part was actually the most important thing, right? So, but anyway, like, you won't know until you try and just go for it. So even if your budget is small, right? Like, I would still prefer that you kind of tried your idea, as opposed to, and even as an investor, right? Like, I think one of my favorite sayings, or what I tell people at pitch all the time, is kind of like traction speaks louder than words. So it's kind of cliched, right? But the idea that like you actually tried it and did it, or got some actual validation from customers, is so much more powerful than just having a good idea in principle, right? And again, there's so many things that I thought were horrible ideas, but turned out to make like tons of money, or like raise a lot of funding. So, um, yeah, prove me wrong, right? Like, it's that kind of thing. Um, yeah, and as I said, I do want to close with this thought, like people working together, that sense of community, like this is what's going to get us through hard times. And I think at the end of the day, this is also the foundation of good business. It's not just like because, people are more woke now or whatever, that we care about these things. Like, to be able to build a good business, you really do need to pay attention to the people, and how your business is interacting with the broader kind of set of stakeholders that you have around you. I think we all, I mean, I'm not the first person to say this, and I won't be the last, but it's always good to be reminded, right? Like that we all kind of exist in this ecosystem, in this community, and building good business isn't just about the profits, right? I mean, and that is important. It will happen, but it cannot be done without like paying attention to this as well. So yeah, I don't know. Send it in the chat, right? Like, I do hope like I've inspired some of you to kind of be part of the ecosystem, whatever you're good at, right? Like if you're in the media, write about a startup, right? Post about a startup. I don't know, mentor a startup if you think you're good at teaching. Obviously, invest in one if you have extra cash. But I'd love to hear how any of you think you might be able to participate in the startup ecosystem. We do have a young but very promising and growing one, that is definitely looking forward to having more of you take part. Um, and as I said, the talent is probably, the biggest thing. Become active, right? Keep up to date. What's going on. Again, there are like tons of events, like just with Kubo, like, again, we do maybe an idea space between us. We do over 100 a year. We're organizing Startup Week next week. That's absolutely free for you to join. We have hundreds of speakers, investors, CEOs, startup founders, like joining that. And there's tons of media out there too that we have nothing to do with, right? Like I put Hustle Share up here as an example, like it's a podcast, right? But there are many ways to kind of just stay abreast with what's going on. So, and of course, last but not the least, use a startup service today. So yeah, thank you so much for your time. I think that's it for my 20 minutes. So please do connect with us. And thank you again so much, Map, for inviting me to speak with you today. So yeah, I'm happy to take questions and just have a chat with everyone.
Thank you, Kat. That interesting and a great overview of the startup ecosystem in the Philippines. As you may have heard, Map is um, a supporter of startups. We organized a startup pitch night a couple of years ago for IdeaSpace. Unfortunately, COVID happened, so we couldn't do a live event after that. But hopefully, with this, we can re-engage with the Map community. So I guess just to kick it off, no, I know you're executive director of both Kubo and IdeaSpace. So just for everyone's benefit, what's the delineation between IdeaSpace and Kubo? What does one organization do over the other? Um, and then how does each kind of help
Yeah, sure.
startups?
Of course. Yeah, so I guess super quickly, like as I said, so IdeaSpace was started, it started earlier, right? So 10 years ago. It was actually spearheaded by the, I guess called MVP group, right? So um and I think we run one of the best accelerator programs out there in the country, and we also invest money in startups. So that's the big dollar signs out there for startups that are looking for funding. And I think that's really it's a private sector kind of activity, right? So if that's what you're looking for, again, one of the best accelerator programs, and also you're looking for early stage investment, and idea spaces for you. I think Kubo, on the other hand, it's the PPP, right? It's the national effort. It's para sa bayan hashtag, right? So we've worked with the government to really make a lot of these programs accessible to way more people. So with idea space, we admit maybe 15, and the biggest cohorts probably around 15 companies at a given year. With Kubo, like, we make available for free, by the way, like, again, hundreds of startup programs a year para wala nang excuse. And we have participants from Benguet to like Marawi, right? So it's a definitely like just a bigger, kind of more open community that you can participate in, and it also allows you to access a lot of these new, I mean, just in the last 5 years, the government has put out so many new programs, grants, things like that, to support new startups. So I think if that's what you're looking into, definitely one platform to look at. And I suppose for corporates also, it is a neutral kind of platform. So we work with everyone from ING to Microsoft to UNICEF to ADB or what have you, right? So, like, again, if you're looking to tap into the country's startup ecosystem more generally, like, I definitely encourage you to kind of team up with Kubo Innovation Hub for that as well.
And I think, it's good you mentioned that. I think you're right, no, in the way you talk about the necessity of an ecosystem to support startups. Um, and I guess, I just wanted to get your thoughts also. I know that we have bits and pieces of everything, but what do you think would be kind of a catalyst or key ingredient that's still missing, that maybe the business community or would be able to address, for that ecosystem to be able to kind of graduate startups to the next level?
Yeah, good question. I again, like, I'll base this on what the startups tell me, and I think the number one thing still is funding. Like, and that funding isn't necessarily just in the form of equity investment. No, it's about, I guess, in like working with a startup. I know there's definitely a lot of challenges startups encounter when dealing with big businesses who typically look for, parang, I don't know, longer track records or like a stronger balance sheet before they endeavor to work with a startup. And a lot of them, they haven't been around for 5-10 years, right? Like, so kind of giving them a chance to break through, or like some quote unquote sandbox, is definitely one thing. And yeah, like, again, just being a customer, I hate to say this, but I feel like there still is this sense na parang may, ano ba, colonial mentality pa rin, like something that's sort of foreign made, or parang it's software built in whatever in Europe, ganon, is somehow superior to something that's being built here. And I do want to reassure, like, a lot of our whoever's listening, know that we are coming up with really good stuff here also. And we should give it a chance. I think, that's a pretty simplistic way to put it, but I said this a few times earlier, parang I think the number one thing, apart from just general investment that startups would be looking for, is to just be having to get that opportunity to work with you guys. And I think they're genuinely gonna like make a lot of that opportunity, and like value it. So I mean, if I could convince 1-2 people out here, like, to kind of think about doing that with a local startup, I think I would have had a good day today. That's what I know about it.
Yeah, yeah. That's actually interesting that you mentioned funding. No, it's yeah, and I've worked with a number of startups myself, on the funding side. And you're right, there is a challenge in terms of obtaining funding. Either and you're right, sometimes funders ask for a better, a longer track record. Obviously, the definition of a startup doesn't have that.
Doesn't
Um,
lend itself to that, yes.
exactly right. That's the whole point of being a startup. And I think there's also something unique, in which has been pointed out in some of these. It even got to HBR where they were talking about the Philippines being unique in terms of the funding environment for startups. That the families are the ones that kind of provide a large source of funding, and it's creating sort of this imbalance between VC and the families, no? Because the families is more permanent capital. Uh, Families being conglomerates, family conglomerates, then versus VCs, which require um, a higher return. So just wanted, and I think that you're right in the approach of kind of engaging map, which is also involved in a lot of these conglomerates as well. Any thoughts on that though? That funding has largely been given by your JG summits or your Ayalas or now GMAs. The Avoidices are also in it, and I guess that lends to a certain type of startup. But
Mhm.
and wanted to get your views on how to diffuse that to a bigger percentage of the people you're working with at Kubo and IdeaSpace.
Okay, this is my, I guess, a personal opinion, no? Pero I will say na I think the important thing here, as always, and this as applies to many things, is like the right communication and also transparency. I do feel like when you're working with a conglo, with a family, as you said, like you're thinking about it generationally, and you're also thinking maybe longer term in a weird way. So parang your typical VC is structured such that your institutional LPs want to see their money back in 7 to 10 years, right? Like, and they want to see a huge chunk of their money, like a multiple on what they invested, right? And I think that lends itself to certain behaviors on the part of VCs, diba? Like, they're seeking growth, like they don't mind, like, I mean, obviously there's some bad stories like WeWork or whatever, but that's generally the story, diba? Like, it's like super high growth, you can be burning money quickly, but in a short amount of time it's either you kind of totally fail or you like make me 100x on my money kind of thing, right? I think that's and that's and that's a sexy story, honestly. Like, if we ask most of the startups we work with, that's probably the kind of train they want to get on, right? Like, that's the inspiring Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk kind of vibe train. That being said, like, I think the reality in, I guess, more conservative places like Philippines, no, and also where a huge chunk of capital is locked into some of these more established conglomerates, is that's probably not the track that they would want to get into, right? Like, and honestly, upfront, like, we get different deal structures, different offers, diba? Parang larger equity asks upfront, maybe more conservative kind of thing, like, structures, or also wanting to see profits earlier on, as opposed to parang investing purely in growth. And like, I'm supposed to say, like, that's not a good thing, right? Like, and I actually have very mixed feelings about this. I think that it's, at the end of the day, it's about finding the right fit between the entrepreneur and the vision of your vision and where you want to take your business and the kind of capital you take in. Like, never take money just because it's there or it's money, right? It has to make sense for what you envision and what you want to build your business out to become, diba? And for some people, like, I think working with the conglos and like the traditional quote money is the right way. For others, it's VCs. For others, like, they'll bootstrap it all the way to their IPO, and we've seen that happen also, right? But I think bottom line is the communication and that sort of vision fit has to be there, because, like, it causes so pag merong misalignment, no, in terms of like what you want to do, like, and what your investor wants to do. And don't take money just because you're desperate, right? Like it has to make sense for how you see your company kind of growing in the future. Because there are also benefits to working with conglos, for example, that VCs will never be able to give you, and vice versa. So yeah, sorry, super long way to answer that question, no,
No,
but
it's
those are
fine.
kind
It's
of just
wonderful,
like,
wonderful. Yeah. Yeah. Well, what about, I guess, shifting to kind of the technical capabilities side? What are you seeing? I mean, you talked about typical startups that have made it big in the States. I guess you started by an engineer who dropped out and worked in a garage. I mean, we have good engineers. They can drop out, and we have a lot of garages. So so
about
what
Kubos,
what
yeah.
what are you finding in terms of, I mean, technical capabilities, or is the educational system uh, uh, churning out good as a critical mass in terms of the technical capability, people with technical capabilities that can kind of build their own startups. And second, I guess related to that is when young people come out of school, do they want to? I get the impression that I'm a bit older, that they want to work in a company rather than start something up on their own. And kind of how do you get people more interested in this type of career path?
Sure. Great question again. So I guess for the first one, does a technical ability exist? Are we churning them out? I would say yes, actually. I mean, the question though is like, are they attracted to this industry, which is sort of part of your second question. I will say no, na parang a lot of the tech talent abroad also, no, like our best talent, and just it's not just in tech, it's in everywhere else, right? Like brain drain is a thing, right? So, um, it's I cannot necessarily say na parang our startup or tech industry is capturing our best and brightest at the moment. I think that's something that we do want to shift or change, if there's anything we could do about it. And um I guess going to your second question, I think the key to that, right, is having some of these success stories. You know, I think for the parang your average parang engineer or college graduate, right? It's so hard to kind of say I'm gonna get an ESOP, like a stock option plan, right? Or I'm gonna get equity, as opposed to like a sure things well though, right? And the reason that value proposition does not make sense is because you haven't seen it happen. Like you haven't seen people that have exited, diba, their Apple, their Snapchat, their whatever shares, diba, and it's actually become worth something. So I think one important key here is to have like this sort of success story and see these kind of things happen in real life, not just to people in China, in the US, but also here. um and yeah, like, I do feel like, again, I'm not sure if I'm as old as you, but at least like what I have observed among younger people, no, is especially with all the crazy things that have happened in their lives, or the volatility they've observed, no, parang there is a lot more seeking kind of value or being part of something and building something, right? And so in that sense, I do feel like there are more people that are getting attracted to kind of joining this industry and kind of building their own companies. But as a proportion of like what I know we can do, versus parang the kinds of businesses or even the sheer number of startups being started here, it's quite low. I mean, if I'm gonna be perfectly honest, no. So there's still a lot of work to be done in that regard, for sure.
Absolutely. I think I agree with your point. There's a lot of work to. There's still a lot of potential. No? Yeah, I actually was in another talk where they were saying Philippines is like Indonesia 15 years ago, right? And you've seen a
Yeah.
Gojek come out of Indonesia, right? And we have our unicorn, being, I guess, Gcash, but then not fair, right? Because obviously Globe funded that,
Yeah,
so
exactly.
it's not the same, right? It's not the
It's not the
same.
same.
Uh, yeah, so you don't see that. You don't see that case where where young
I mean, if you
entrepreneurs
think
can see
about
an
it,
exit.
diba? Like, why can't we have our own Gcash? Our own all of these things, right? Like, I think the ingredients we have here as opposed to Indonesia, baka mas okay pa kaya atin eh. Like, if I'm being totally honest, right? But the mindset, I
Exactly,
think,
right?
it's not the lack of talent, it's not the raw ingredients, but it's the decision to kind of take the leap and do this instead. No,
Like,
that I feel is maybe holding us back.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And it's funny, right? Because even a Flappy Bird can come out of Vietnam, right? Yeah, right? How hard can it be to build that one, right? And
Exactly.
yeah, I guess that's one of the things, personally, that I find, hopefully we at MAP and me personally, I'd want to see and help a Filipino name come out like that globally, because you're right. I do think that the capabilities are here, and as I mentioned, there are enough garages around, right? So so it's always a question that's kind of been at the back of my mind. Why can't we come up with something like that, built by a person, and kind of, that can be replicated. Yeah, so I guess, just to close things out, we just have a few more minutes. Maybe, I turn it back to you. Maybe you have some closing words for the participants in this session.
Yeah, you know, as I was saying earlier, just start, like, again, it doesn't have to cost you that much, or it doesn't have to, you don't have to lose your reputation even, I'm not gonna say that, starting up is entirely easy, right? Or that it's for everyone, but there is a role for everyone, like that you can play in this whole kind of crazy world, and it is an exciting one. And you'll never know unless you try. Like, that's such a try thing to say, but I really want to emphasize that there are, organizations even like us that are here to support you. MAP is here, right? Like, to kind of make the journey easier, or at least fail faster, if that makes sense, right? So, yeah, I would love for all of you to kind of just, if there's something, if you have an idea burning in the back of your head or something, a problem that's been nagging at you that you think you could do better at solving than whatever is already out there, right? Like, just go for it. And again, like, there are ways to try it out that don't have to be super expensive or, career ending or whatever. Right? I think it's one. Two, again, even in whatever organization you're currently in, like, starting a startup isn't the only path. There are multiple ways to kind of be entrepreneurial and apply some of these mindsets, in whatever work you're currently pursuing. And again, work with us if you're curious about some of these things. And we're happy to do that. And of course, I did tell Paolo this beforehand. I plan to plug, as part of my final words, Philippine Startup Week, which is happening next week. It's the biggest gathering of everything and anything kind of startup related in the Philippines. We're working with the ICT, the OST, and DTI on this endeavor, but also, 60, 70, I think, community partners, investors, startups, and tens of thousands of participants from around the world. And admission is free. So, please get your ticket if you haven't already. And I hope to see you there. So, yeah, those are my closing thoughts and one plug. Um,
Thank you so much, Kat. It was a privilege to have you here today. For our audience members, if we'll have a video guide to be played after this on how you can transfer to the plenary closing session, which is one that features the Filipinos who made it to the Forbes 30 under
under
30 in
30.
2021. Um,
Daming
and
startups and entrepreneurs done, by the
Yeah,
way.
yeah, exactly. I think Carmina worked with
Yeah,
IdeaSpace
Carbs is
before.
one. Yeah, a few
Yeah,
others.
so good
I'm just
case,
really
right?
glad actually na parang nagme-mainstream na yung startup. It used to be such a niche thing when I got started in this industry, and now it's like Forbes being recognized and even Map, no? So again,
Yeah.
so glad to be here.
Okay. Yeah, so thank you so much, Kat, and thank you to the participants. So we hope to see you in the closing session.